So, in this podcast, it, it gets a little confusing because I was coming home from work and there was a very, very roundish, rotund lady. She happened to be an African American woman and she smelled very fragrant. I could smell this woman from like a half of a subway car away. And so I have to say, for all the weight, and it must be hard to wash out the crevices, all the folds, because, she was a massive woman. But, so, she was sitting there complaining to her friend about another friend, and she said the N-word. And I looked as if I was a little offended, and she caught a look at me, and she said to her friend a little more, she had her eyes a little squinty, and she said about her other friend, to her good friend that was sitting there in the train, she said the N-word. And she looked at me kind of like a dirty look. And I acted like I was offended. And she said to me, don't you ever let me catch you with that word in your mouth. And I said, why? I wasn't going to say the N-word. And she said, don't you, because, we say the N-word. We can say the N-word. You ever let me see you with the N-word in your mouth. And I thought right then, I said, you know what, maybe somebody should take some sort of a implement and try to suck out some of the glycerol from your jowls and your neck. And that would be better for you if they could get a little bit of your head glycerol siphoned off of your massive head. I didn't say this to this woman, but I said to her myself, I was like, it's a little offensive if you say the N-word. And it doesn't matter if you're black or African American. If you say the N-word, everybody can hear it, the N-word. And maybe it's offensive to me a little bit, the N-word. And the guy who was sitting next to me, he was smoking a really stinky cigar. And I thought, how the hell do you smoke a cigar on a subway train and all that? So this is the kind of city we live in. But he said, listen, don't worry about her. He goes, don't worry about her, man. She's she is what she is. He called her like a sweet mama or a flapjack mama or something. I forget, I can't remember. He said, just that, people don't want you, it's okay for the black people to say N-word, but you can't say N-word. And I said, I don't even really want to say N-word. But, years ago, when I was a young man, it was a little hip for all the white people. I grew up in a white people world, and there's appropriation, cultural appropriation. There was a little bit of time when there was appropriate. The N-word became appropriated to white culture. The way Elvis Presley's swinging hips and the blues or the rock and roll thing that they did back in the 50s became appropriated. It was a good thing. And we had a little bit of a time where we said the N-word in perhaps the late 80s, early 90s in the white world. I'm talking about the white world where, you hang out in the woods. These are the kind of people where I grew up. What are you going to do for recreation? Are we going to go to a restaurant or a sporting event? No, man. We're going to go in the woods. We're going to go in the woods and drink beer. Any kind of beer, it doesn't matter. We could have a keg. We'd have cases. Sometimes you could go to a bar and get your cheap little quarter-gallon, like little tiny milk jugs filled up with beer. We're going to go in there. And the other thing you do in the white person world, you would go and have a good party, and you would drink some beer, and maybe you would meet a girl. You would, but they also had some really bad, horrible white people world of marijuana. The worst weed you ever seen. This is like hemp weed. Like this was dehydrated weed. They took all the, the scent. The THC and or the CBD oil was dehydrated, and you would smoke this, and it was a very, very tiny little mild buzz you could get from this weed. This was white people world weed. It was very, very unpotent. It was almost like hemp. Like you could make a shopping bag, a reusable shopping bag out for the grocery store out of this kind of weed, and you could process it. Just by slamming it in your glove box, and you could make some kind of I don't even know, a game for children or something. I don't know. It was so horrible. But you would go out into the woods and you would get some of this really bad weed, and you would like the fall because the air would be crisp, and you would have some kind of bear, and there'd be no leaves on the trees, and you could see to the wild further, and it was at this time that there was a time when we all came back from college, and one of my friends was in the Fairleigh Dickinson on a wrestling scholarship. Another one of my friends went to Lehigh University on an academic scholarship. I went to a little tiny college on a Pell Grant, but we all got back together, and when we got back into the, when we got together, we drove to like a part where there's like the road. No one even came on the road. Like there was just a road, and you could just pull off on the side of the road. No cars even went by. It's how deep into the woods this was, a road, and there was no one else coming. You could park right in the middle. You could lay out, you could go to sleep in the middle of the road on the yellow line. No one was going to run you over. No one was coming. And we would walk a little further down a trail, and then you would go off the trail a little bit towards a few big rocks we knew about, and there was some good firewood, and we would make a big giant bonfire. Like if black people, like in their culture, in their heritage, they might like to be in a jungle, who knows, in the warmth near the equator with vines hanging and special kinds of lizards and cucutans, the kind of birds with the big beaks. And they could maybe hit some drums, and they would enjoy the drums. They would go to the flow of the drum. The white people, they like the bonfire. They like the stark woods with no leaves on the trees and just the big, broad, straight, severe tree trunks, no leaves. They like the brisk, and they like the bonfire. The bonfire is kind of like the white people drums. Like you sit there and you sway, and you get into the flickering flames, and you feel the warmth. It's as if you were a black person, you would be maybe feel comfortable innately in your past. If you were where maybe there was a big lagoon of beautiful water, and there was lush vegetation hanging down, and there was banana trees, and maybe there was some drums. Maybe they had some big long hollowed out logs, and they could make really beautiful percussion. Innately, this would appeal to you. In the white people world, you would like to be a little starker. Maybe it's already sunset. It was a gray day and the sun is set, and it's stark, cold, severe tree trunks, and there's no leaves on any of the trees. And the only thing you have is the starkness and the cold and the really, really horrifyingly bad weed and some kind of a beer. It doesn't matter what kind of beer. And you would have the bonfire. And the bonfire is kind of like a rhythm to us. It's like the drums. It's be like, so we could have some good, and that's just like in depth, innately from the old days when we would hope there was some wolves that we could go battle. Where the white people were just trying to catch a good buzz, so maybe we can go pick a fight with a pack of wolves. So anyways, it was at this time we came back together, and we all came back from college, and we had some good weed. From college weed was a lot better than the white people woods weed, but we were going in the woods to celebrate being white people woods people. But when we got out of the car, one of my friends says to me, "Hey, my N-word." I said, "My N-word?" I'd never heard that expression, my N-word. I had heard it, but not as between me and my friends. And I said, "My N-word," to my friend. I said, "My N-word. Hey, my N-word." And we exchanged my N-word, but where we had learned it was during a Howard Stern show. A Snoot Dogg came on, and it was way back in the old days, back in the 80s, I believe, or the late 80s, early 90s, and Howard Stern was a white people world. It wasn't like they were just a crossover or anything. Snoot Dogg wasn't going to use a N-word on Howard Stern, and then we wouldn't have some exposure to the white people. The white people, oh my goodness, he's saying the N-word, is it acceptable? Can I use the N-word? But, you could say at the beginning, because there was, a lot of white people even use the N-word out loud anyways. But now, cool people didn't want to ever say the N-word. Now they say, hey, can I say the N-word as a term of endearment? Can I say that my friend over here, my friend the N-word, you could say as a term of endearment to your friend. And this would be good for you. And you would enjoy, the camaraderie. But we saw, Snoot Dogg, he was using the N-word on Howard Stern, and Howard Stern was a radio, and then Howard Stern for a brief time had like a TV show where they just followed him around, handheld cameras, and filmed him doing his radio show. But, Snoot Dogg and two or three of his buddies, they weren't even in the green room. They were like out in the lobby. to the radio. Before you get to the radio booth, there's a lobby for any kind of person, the receptionist, and they stood there, and the video camera, handheld video cameraman, they filmed them smoking a big giant Philly blunt, a big ginormous. Back in the day, they would take the Philly Stiparillos and they would make the Philly blunts with some really cool, they called it the Chronic. It was juicy, skunky weed. They loved it, everybody. You could get high off the cloud, off the breathe out. You could someone exhale a big cloud of smoke. You could catch a contact high, you could get a contact stoning. But Snoop Dogg and his friends, Snoop Dogg sang a song into the camera that went out to all of us. To me, I was a young man, very young man, and he said, I am an N-word, you're an N-word, wouldn't you want to be an N-word too? Be an N-word. And I thought, my goodness gracious, what a wonderful substitution of the one you want to be, whatever they said in the song. I can't remember what they said. Wouldn't you want to be wouldn't you want to be something like a chiropractor or something, a fish salesman, a fishmonger or something? I'm a crackerjack, I'm a something, I'm a whatever. But Snoop Dogg, he substituted, I'm an N-word. And as he was smoking a big giant blunt and his eyes were slits and they were red as blood. And he was so stoned already, and he was smoking another big giant Philly blunt, and he says, I'm an N-word, you're an N-word, wouldn't you want to be an N-word too? Be an N-word. And I always thought, you know what, I do want to be an N-word. Yes, Snoop Dogg, I want to be an N-word. I want to be cool like an N-word. I wish I could be an N-word. Can I be an N-word? Over here, my friend, can I be an N-word? And for a brief time, we all would call each other my N-words. In the woods, only in the stark white person world, deep in the white. There was no other, any kind of person around. There was no kind of diversification. I don't even think there was no homosexuals. There was no girls. There was just white men, in the woods, in the stark, cold autumn woods around the bonfire, smoking some hemp rope and drinking some whatever kind of cold beer we could get. And we felt a kinship as if we were each other's N-words. And for a brief time there, we could say, hey, my N-word, if there was no one around. If you were just on a lonely country road and you walked off the road and you walked down a trail and you got off the trail over to somewhere some rocks were that you and your friends knew from your childhood, early days of your childhood. There you could be in the white person world, you could be an N-word to each other. But even that didn't last too long. It was a couple of years we could be each other's N-words, and then all of a sudden you realize you can't say the N-word anymore. They're outlawing us ever saying the N-word. And to me it was a big, it was a big disappointment because Snoop Dogg had invited me to be an N-word on the Howard Stern show while he was smoking a Philly blunt and singing a wonderful jingle. And I said, yes, I will be an N-word. I want to be an N-word too. Just like you, Snoop Dogg, I want to be an N-word. And so for a brief period, we became N-words, but then it was over. We didn't get to stay N-words too long, and then we had to move on and just, And then the white people world, it was a little diversification and cultural approbation both ways. But anyway, that was the brief period where we got to be the N-words. And so as I was sitting on that train and that big, fat, ginormous woman, she was a big, obese woman, that she smelled very fragrant. I have to say, she smelled very sweet for being such a big, roly-poly woman. But and then the man next to me smoking the stinky cigar there. They were very kind. They were actually very nice. They were just straightening me out, saying, "Hey, you can't say the N-word, even though we can say the N-word anytime we want. We can say it here, there, anywhere. But you don't let me catch the N-word in your mouth." And I said, "Oh, fine." So he wants to say the N-word anyways. I said, well, who even cares? You go ahead. You say the N-word all you like. I don't need to say it. But whatever. But this is just a brief interlude. We were trying to test our audio to see if it worked for a podcast. I don't even know if we're ever going to do the podcast, but, as an exasperated psychologist, 1, 2, 3, 4 signing off or whatever. I hope you got it. I hope the test was good, but it just was a memory I had from the old days.